Kemalism in the 21st Century, a Geopolitical Imperative for Türkiye. Gürdeniz. Kemalism, which founded the Republic, is the immortal founding philosophy of the state that will enable Turkey to rise again amid the great power competition of the 21st century and carry it to the geopolitical position it deserves. The global order has changed irreversibly. For nearly 80 years, the international system rested on American military, economic, and financial supremacy. It has now entered a process of disintegration and collapse. The order presented after 1945 as Pax Americana gradually turned with the end of the Cold War into Bellum Americana, an era of hegemony sustained through wars and crises. The breakup of Yugoslavia, the destruction of Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria, color revolutions, economic sanctions, proxy wars, and NATO's eastward expansion were milestones of this period. The mass destruction and genocide in Gaza since late 2023, meanwhile, are not only a humanitarian tragedy, but also the clearest indication that the discourse of a rules-based order has in practice been abandoned by its own founders. The fact that international law, the United Nations system, the Geneva Conventions, and the principle of state sovereignty have become ineffective in the face of the political preferences of great powers has severely eroded the legitimacy of the order established after the Second World War. The Russia-Ukraine war that began in 2022, the events in Gaza after 2023, attacks on maritime transport in the Red Sea, and finally the 12-day Iran war in 2025, followed by the war involving Iran, Israel, and the United States that began on 28 February 2026, together with new regional conflicts, have demonstrated that neither warfare nor the international system operates according to the old rules. Military power, production capacity, technology, energy security, and geopolitical resilience have become more decisive than the law of nations. The world is returning to classical geopolitics based on balances of power. In this process, the weaponization of geography and the strengthening of eschatology are particularly striking. The most important geopolitical reality facing Türkiye in the Republic's second century is that the Black Sea and the Mediterranean have once again become the principal geostrategic theater of global power rivalry. At the center of this struggle are efforts to weaken or fragment Russia strategically, contain China and limit its global rise, and establish a regional order that supports Israel's geopolitical objectives together with its eschatological vision. The rivalry between the collective West, represented by the United States, the European Union, and NATO, and the axis of resistance taking shape against it, has transformed the Black Sea and Mediterranean basins into the defining arena of geopolitical struggle in the 21st century. The Mediterranean is not merely an inland sea stretching between Europe, Asia, and Africa. It is the center of the global maritime system that links the Black Sea through the Turkish Straits to the interior of Eurasia, through the Suez Canal to the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Indo-Pacific, and through the Strait of Gibraltar to the Atlantic. In other words, the Mediterranean is Eurasia's lock, opening onto the sea. The power that controls this lock can influence not only the eastern Mediterranean, but also the geopolitical balance of Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and Eurasia. For this reason, the rivalry between Israel and Türkiye in the 21st century has moved far beyond temporary diplomatic crises and has become a structural geopolitical competition that will be extremely difficult to reverse. The Gaza War, the future of Syria, the Blue Homeland, the eastern Mediterranean energy basins, Cyprus and the Levantine coasts, new transportation corridors and maritime jurisdiction zones now show that Ankara and Tel Aviv face one another in the same strategic theater. Israel considers undisputed maritime and air superiority in the eastern Mediterranean and the prevention of any regional power capable of challenging it south of Anatolia to be vital interests for its security. Türkiye, for its part, regards the protection of the Blue Homeland, the security of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, TRNC, and its maritime jurisdiction zones in the eastern Mediterranean as inseparable parts of its national sovereignty. Reconciling these two approaches within the same geopolitical space is becoming more difficult by the day. Israel's greatest strategic advantage in this competition is not limited to its military and technological capacity. Through its strong political influence in Washington, it also carries decisive weight in shaping U.S. policies toward the Middle East and the eastern Mediterranean. For many years, the security interests of the United States and Israel have largely overlapped. For this reason, Washington's regional military deployments, energy policies, diplomatic initiatives in the eastern Mediterranean, and search for regional alliances often cannot be assessed independently of Israel's security priorities. In recent years, with Greece and the Greek Cypriot administration of southern Cyprus incorporated into this strategic architecture, Türkiye has come to face not merely a challenge at the level of bilateral relations, but a new Eastern Mediterranean axis backed by the Atlantic system. Extending from Alexandroupolis to Crete, from Suda Bay to military structures in southern Cyprus, and from the rapidly developing military cooperation between Israel and Greece to the energy and security partnerships established with the Greek Cypriot administration, this geopolitical line has taken on the appearance of a long-term containment strategy aimed at restricting Türkiye's blue homeland doctrine and its maritime gateway to Eurasia.
The issue, therefore, is no longer merely a few islands in the Aegean, the Cyprus question, or natural gas fields. The struggle concerns the future of the Mediterranean, the lock of Eurasia. The erosion of U.S. power. The transformation taking place in the international system is not caused solely by the rise of China, Russia, and other emerging powers. The principal determining factor is the erosion of the relative power of the United States, which established the unipolar order after the Cold War. Washington still possesses the world's largest military budget, broadest alliance network, and most powerful financial system, but it no longer has unlimited capacity to sustain prolonged strategic competition simultaneously in Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. After the end of the Cold War, the U.S.-led liberal West presented the American way of life, neoliberal capitalism, and liberal democracy as a universal model of civilization, even proclaiming the end of history. Yet the past 35 years have shown that this claim did not come true. The chain of crises stretching from Iraq to Afghanistan, Libya to Syria, Ukraine to Gaza, and the Strait of Hormuz to Taiwan has deepened instability rather than establishing global peace. It has become clear that Pax Americana was quite short-lived compared with the Roman, British, and even Ottoman eras of peace. Today, rather than accepting the emerging multipolar balance of power, the United States and Anglo-Saxon geopolitics use crises and wars as fundamental instruments of foreign policy in order to preserve their supremacy. NATO's eastward expansion, military pressure in the Taiwan Strait, operations in the Red Sea, sanctions against Iran, and a regional strategy prioritizing Israel's security are different fronts of this approach.
The strategy of wearing down rivals by continuously building belts of pressure around Eurasia, while benefiting from the geographical security provided by two oceans, no longer produces the expected result. The comprehensive strategic partnership between Russia and China, the expansion of BRICS, the development of Eurasian transportation corridors, and the rapid rise of Chinese naval power have fundamentally altered the balance of power established after the Cold War. The United States, meanwhile, is simultaneously consuming its military, economic, and diplomatic resources on three separate fronts as it tries to contain Russia in Europe, ensure Israel's security in the Middle East, and balance China in the Indo-Pacific. Throughout history, no great power has been able to sustain global military expansion for long without the support of adequate economic and industrial capacity. This is the fundamental problem Washington faces today. Behind this strategic erosion lie not only foreign policy choices, but also deepening structural problems. The United States, which controlled 52% of global manufacturing in 1945, has today fallen to 18% and ceded leadership to China. With annual interest payments of $1.2 trillion, public debt exceeding $41 trillion, and a rising interest burden, it is experiencing one of the most severe fiscal pressures in its history. At the same time, inequality in income distribution, political polarization on a scale unseen since the Civil War, a crisis of social trust, and deindustrialization are weakening the country's economic and social resilience. The defense industry faces similar problems, particularly in the field of naval power. Reduced shipbuilding capacity, inadequate shipyard infrastructure, maintenance and repair delays, and a shortage of skilled labor are limiting the ability of the world's largest navy to sustain a prolonged, high-intensity war.
The Russia-Ukraine war exposed the limits of the ammunition production capacity of the American and European defense industries. The naval campaign against the Houthis in the Red Sea and the 2026 Iran war, meanwhile, showed that stocks of high-technology munitions such as Patriot, THAAD, Standard, and Tomahawk could be depleted far more quickly than expected. The issue is not only how many missiles are produced, but how quickly they can be reproduced during wartime, delivered to the front, and used to replenish depleted inventories. In the high-intensity wars of the future, the decisive factor will no longer be the number of platforms, so much as industrial production capacity, ammunition stocks, and logistical sustainability. For this reason, the cost and sustainability of a prolonged conflict with China in the Pacific have become a greater subject of debate in Washington than ever before.
Once the undisputed guarantor of global maritime transport routes and strategic straits, the United States today lacks absolute freedom of movement even in critical choke points such as the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb. In conclusion, the decline of U.S. power is relative rather than absolute. Yet this relative erosion in the face of a rising Asia increasingly narrows Washington's ability to maintain military supremacy and manage crises on multiple fronts at once, making it one of the principal dynamics accelerating the international system's shift from a unipolar order toward a multipolar balance of power. Türkiye and the end of the Atlantic paradigm. The geopolitical picture facing Türkiye today shows that the Cold War security architecture is no longer sustainable.
Initiatives in the Eastern Mediterranean that exclude Türkiye from energy arrangements and maritime jurisdiction zones, intensifying military and political rivalry with Israel, security threats in northern Syria and Iraq, pressure for an independent Kurdistan in the Tigris-Euphrates basin, the deterioration of peace and stability in the Black Sea, power struggles in Libya and Somalia, and deepening disputes in the Aegean all demonstrate that the strategic encirclement around Türkiye is being felt simultaneously on different fronts. PKK terrorism, the FETÖ organization, and attempts at external intervention have also shown that domestic security and external geopolitics cannot be assessed separately. For Türkiye, the fundamental issue is not to debate past alliance preferences, but to develop an independent geopolitical paradigm based on national interests within the changing multipolar world order. The central question for the Republic's second century is therefore how Türkiye can regain strategic initiative without becoming an extension of any center of power. The answer to how is Kemalism, the need for a new paradigm. In the second quarter of the 21st century, as global balances of power change rapidly and unipolarity gives way to multipolar competition, it has become inevitable for Türkiye to redefine its strategic priorities. History shows that states clinging to the status quo during periods of great power transition pay a heavy price. Just as the British Empire gradually ceded its global supremacy to the United States after the First World War, today the American-centered international system is experiencing a relative erosion of power, while new centers of power become more influential in world politics. For Türkiye, this change is not merely a transformation in the international system, it is also a historic window of opportunity.
Situated at the intersection of Anatolia, the Balkans, the Black Sea, the Caucasus, the Eastern Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Central Asia, Türkiye is not the natural extension of any center of power. Its geopolitics, historical experience, production potential, and state tradition place it in a distinctive position. Not one forced to choose between East and West, but one capable of building balanced relations with both on the basis of national interests. Türkiye's future foreign and security policy must therefore be built not on ideological loyalties, but on reason, geopolitical realism, national interest, economic productive power, and strategic autonomy. In the face of changing international balances, a multi-directional foreign policy capable of developing mutually beneficial relations with all centers of power, without becoming the automatic extension of any alliance, must become the central state strategy of the Republic's second century. As a natural consequence, neither Turkish blood nor the economic resources of the Turkish nation should be consumed in geopolitical struggles unrelated to Türkiye's direct national interests. Economic vulnerabilities should not be addressed through foreign policy concessions, and security concerns should not become a justification for new networks of relationships that increase external dependence. Türkiye must determine its destiny not according to the strategic priorities of others, but on the basis of its own history, geography, and national interests. In the New World Order, the measure of independence is not military power alone. Production capacity, technology, energy security, maritime dominance, food supply, financial resilience, and social unity have also become inseparable elements of national power. The fundamental challenge before Türkiye is to reunite these elements under a common state mind.
At precisely this point, the Republic's founding philosophy and the Kemalist conception of the state regain importance not merely as a historical legacy, but as a strategic roadmap suited to the geopolitical realities of the 21st century. The name of this path is Kemalism. The name of the new strategic paradigm Turkey needs is Kemalism. Yet Kemalism is not merely a symbolic identity expressing affection for Ataturk, as it has been narrowed down over the years, nor is it a state tradition reduced to official ceremonies or a formalistic Ataturkism. Kemalism is a philosophy of governance capable of organizing national power under the guidance of science and reason through an independent state mind and geopolitical realism.
It is the name of the strategic thinking that enabled the cadres who founded the Republic to create a modern nation-state from the ashes of a collapsing empire. Over time, the concept of Kemalism was consciously or unconsciously replaced by a hollowed-out understanding of Atatürkism, while its revolutionary, anti-imperialist, and geopolitical dimensions were pushed largely into the background. Yet the essence of Kemalism is not to repeat particular historical practices, but to preserve the principle of full independence while continuously developing the Republic in response to changing world conditions. In this respect, Kemalism is not a frozen ideology belonging to the past, but a dynamic conception of the state directed toward the future. It is noteworthy that the term Kemalist was first used not by those who founded the Republic, but by foreign circles opposing the national struggle. For them, Kemalist was the name of the will that rejected Sevres, resisted imperialism, and succeeded in establishing a new state in Anatolia. Over time, the concept came to signify not only the followers of Mustafa Kemal, but also a political thought that defended full independence, national sovereignty, and modernization together.
Even today, what has changed is not the essence of the struggle. The power mentality that sought to bring Türkiye under control through military occupation a century ago continues to exist in the 21st century through economic dependence, technology, finance, proxy wars, sanctions, information operations, and geopolitical encirclement. Kemalism is therefore not only the strongest strategic reference of the Republic's founding era, but also the strongest strategic reference for preserving Türkiye's independence in the new multipolar world order. Kemalism is not the name of longing for the past, it is the name of building the future as an independent, strong, and modern Türkiye. Kemalist's prescription is essential. The ideal of a safe, prosperous, productive Republic of Türkiye that has reached, in Atatürk's words, the level of contemporary civilization can be achieved only by reinterpreting and applying Kemalism's fundamental principles in accordance with the conditions of the 21st century. Kemalism is not merely the product of a struggle for independence, it is also a comprehensive program of modern state-building, economic development, scientific thought, and social transformation. Today, the great majority of Turkish society wants to benefit from the opportunities offered by modern life. Yet modernity is not merely consuming technological products, earning a high income, or living comfortably in modern cities. Genuine modernization is a social order in which reason takes precedence over dogma, science guides decision-making, the rule of law is established, women and men have equal opportunities, production takes precedence over consumption, and the state serves the citizen rather than the citizen serving the state. The ideological polarization, populist politics, and identity-centered debates of the past half-century have directed a significant share of Türkiye's energy toward internal conflict. During this process, religion, ethnic identity, and ideological affiliation have often been turned into the principal arenas of political competition, while many strategic priorities, from education to the economy and from science to production, have been pushed into the background. Yet in the 21st century, the power of states is measured by the extent to which they can unite their societies around a common national objective. The fundamental principles of Kemalism, republicanism, nationalism, populism, statism, secularism, and revolutionism are not 6 independent political slogans. They are complementary principles that together uphold the national sovereignty, social cohesion, economic independence, scientific development, and continuous will for renewal of the modern Turkish state. The weakening of any one of these principles leads over time to the erosion of the others. What Türkiye needs today is not to reproduce the debates of the past, but to reinterpret the Republic's founding philosophy in light of the needs of the 21st century. The challenges of the new age, from artificial intelligence to space technologies, maritime geopolitics to energy security, and the production economy to education reform, can be met only through a conception of the state based on reason, science, planning, production, and full independence. For this reason, Kemalism is the strongest strategic reference not only for the Republic's founding era, but also for national unity, economic development, social justice, and geopolitical independence in Türkiye's second century. For 21st century Türkiye, Kemalism is not a memory of the past, but the state mind of the future. The foundation of Kemalism is the Republic. Kemalism is not only the historical experience of the cadres who founded the Republic, but also a philosophy of the state that aims to build the future.
At its foundation lies the Republic, a modern nation-state understanding in which sovereignty belongs unconditionally to the nation, reason and science guide state administration, and full independence is accepted as an indispensable principle. Kemalism is therefore not a static ideology seeking to preserve the past, but a dynamic modernization project aimed at continuously developing the Republic by adapting to changing global conditions. The revolutions and transformation carried out during the Republic's first 15 years were not merely the establishment of a new state, they constituted the greatest modernization drive in Turkish history. A society that had fallen behind because of centuries of wars, economic backwardness, and foreign intervention, and had remained almost in the Middle Ages, was through deep-rooted reforms extending from education to law, the economy to culture, women's rights to state administration, brought within a very short time into the modern world. Kemalism is therefore not the program of any particular class, stratum, or ideological group, but a national program of development and state-building intended to construct the common future of the entire Turkish nation. One of Kemalism's most important characteristics is that it is not an ideology imported from abroad. Unlike liberalism, Marxism, social democracy, fascism, or politicalism, systems of thought shaped by the historical conditions of other geographies, Kemalism emerged from the Turkish nation's struggle for existence during the years of the national struggle. It therefore represents an original historical experience that proceeded not from theory to practice, but from the necessities imposed by life to a philosophy of the state. Its source of legitimacy is not foreign schools of thought, but the Turkish nation's will for independence. The Republic is the concrete embodiment of that will.
The resistance at Gallipoli, the victory at Kut al-Amara. Mustafa Kemal's words, "They will leave as they came," in occupied Istanbul on 13 November 1918. The national will that began in Amasya, the Erzurum and Sivas Congresses, the confidence gained at İnönü, the life or death struggle at Sakarya, the ammunition carried from İnebolu into Anatolia, the ox carts crossing the Kude Mountains, the great offensive launched at Kocatepe, and a victory that reached the sea at Izmir on 9 September 1922 are the historical foundation stones of the Republic. The Republic is the political expression not only of a military victory, but also of national sovereignty, independence, and the will to modernize. In this respect, the Republic and Kemalism are the greatest achievement of statecraft in Turkish history. They constitute a great civilizational movement in which science prevailed over superstition, reason over dogma, citizenship over servitude, and national sovereignty over imperialism. They are also a manifesto of the will to overcome nearly 4 centuries of military, economic, and technological backwardness. The following assessment of the late Professor Dr. Ahmed Taner Kishlali most accurately captures the essence of Kemalism. Kemalism is neither standing guard over Ataturk, nor the sum of what was done under the conditions of the 1920s. Kemalism is an ideology of modernization with a democratic socialist essence, based on the principle of permanent revolutionism. Kemalism is a movement of civilization achieved not with the support of the West, but in spite of the West. The philosophy underlying the Republic is humanist and progressive. This definition remains valid today. The true purpose of Kemalism is not to sanctify the past, but to safeguard the Turkish nation's independence, prosperity, and goal of contemporary civilization by continuously renewing the Republic so that it can adapt to changing world conditions. The 6 arrows belong to the Turkish nation.
The institutional foundation of Kemalism is embodied in the 6 arrows, the symbol of the Republican People's Party. Yet the 6 arrows are often regarded merely as a historical party program or as political principles belonging to the Republic's early years. In fact, these 6 principles are complementary elements that constitute the national power of the modern Turkish state. They belong to the Turkish nation. Republicanism represents the legitimacy of the state. Nationalism, national unity. Populism, social solidarity. Statism, economic independence. Secularism, the guidance of reason and science. And revolutionism, the will for continuous renewal. The 6 arrows are not independent of one another. Together, they form a complementary strategic model of the state. Republicanism and nationalism secured the nation-state by uniting the Turkish nation under a common identity of citizenship. Populism represented social justice and national solidarity. Statism, national productive capacity in strategic sectors and economic independence. And secularism, the removal of dogma from state administration and the placement of reason and science at the center of decision-making. Revolutionism transformed the Republic from a frozen structure into a dynamic conception of the state capable of continuously adapting to changing world conditions. In the geopolitics of the 21st century, the significance of the 6 arrows has grown even further. In an age of artificial intelligence, advanced technology, energy security, maritime geopolitics, space, cybersecurity, and the defense industry, the success of states is measured not only by military power, but also by their capacity to produce science, the quality of their education systems, their industrial infrastructure, and their social cohesion.
Each of the 6 arrows remains a fundamental pillar of the state capacity required by this new age.
Secularism, the nation-state, and permanent revolution. Kemalism rose upon the shared consciousness of homeland created by the national struggle. The military achievements stretching from Gallipoli to the Great Offensive not only ended the occupation, but also enabled the people of Anatolia, from different backgrounds, to unite around a common national identity. The Republic built the modern Turkish nation through an understanding of common citizenship that transcended ethnic, sectarian, and regional affiliations. Kemalistic nationalism is therefore not exclusionary. It is a civic nationalism founded on a shared history, shared destiny, and shared future. The most important safeguard of this structure is secularism. Secularism is not hostility to religion or belief. It is the constitutional principle that ensures state administration is conducted on the basis of reason, science, and law. By leaving faith within the realm of conscience, it safeguards both freedom of religion and the neutrality of the state. In this way, no faith or sect can exercise state power alone, and citizens are regarded as equal before the law. The revolutions carried out in the Republic's early years were the natural result of this understanding. Reforms extending from education to law, the economy to culture, sought to make Turkish society part of the modern world within a short period. Early attempts to transition to multi-party politics could not become permanent because the domestic and international conditions of the period were unsuitable. This did not, however, change the Republic's fundamental objective. The aim was first to establish a strong and modern state structure, and then to mature it through democratic institutions. Kemalism's principle of revolutionism gains importance precisely at this point. Revolutionism does not mean denying the past, it means the will to continuously develop the Republic in accordance with changing world conditions.
States that remain static decline, while states capable of renewing themselves can preserve their place on the stage of history. China is the best example in this regard. Having increased its national income 14-fold over the past 25 years, China has in fact become the country that has applied Kemalism most successfully. Populism, Kemalism's principle of social justice. Populism, one of Kemalism's most important principles, is not merely the ideal of a classless and unprivileged society. It is also a conception of the social state that balances individual happiness with society's common welfare. In the Kemalist conception of the state, individual well-being cannot be considered independently of social well-being. The state's duty is not only to protect its borders, but also to create the economic and social conditions in which its citizens can live with dignity. Populism is therefore a modern principle of the state that ensures equality of opportunity, protects labor, prevents extreme deterioration in income distribution, encourages production, and upholds social justice. The high unemployment Türkiye faces today, under the influence of savage capitalism and ruthless neoliberalism, especially youth unemployment, together with rapidly deepening income inequality, in-work poverty, millions of retirees struggling to make ends meet, the informal economy, the renewed rise of child labor, inadequate participation of women in the workforce, and inequalities of opportunity are not merely economic problems. They are also consequences of the weakening of the Republic's principle of populism. A strong state is not merely one that produces large infrastructure and construction projects, it is also one that does not condemn retirees to poverty, can offer its youth a future, does not allow children to be cut off from education, provides women and men with equal opportunities in production, and does not permit the exploitation of labor.
In Kemalist populism, what matters is a strong social state that ensures equality of opportunity within a production economy, protects labor, observes social justice, and safeguards the common future of every member of the nation. National unity is sustained not only by a common history and a common flag, but also by a sense of justice, the sharing of prosperity, and the citizens' trust in the state. For this reason, populism is the social conscience of the 6 arrows. Post-Ataturk transformation and the departure from Kemalism. Following Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's early death, the revolutionary dynamism that formed the Republic's founding philosophy gradually weakened. Although Kemalism was institutionally secured when the 6 arrows were incorporated into the Constitution in 1937, and although it preserved its legal existence, it gradually lost its determining influence over state administration. The conception of continuous revolution that characterized the Republic's founding years gave way to a more status quo-oriented approach. One important reason was that Kemalism had emerged not from an extensive theoretical literature such as liberalism or socialism, but from the practice of the national struggle and state building. Instead of adapting this thought to changing world conditions,
later generations increasingly reduced it to a historical legacy and a symbolic form of Ataturkism. The bipolar system that emerged after the Second World War accelerated this transformation. With the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, the Korean War, and NATO membership in 1952, Turkey was integrated into the Atlantic security system. Although this orientation was understandable under the security conditions of the period, in the long term it caused foreign and security policies to be shaped according to Atlantic priorities. The process affected not only foreign policy, but also the military, political, and social structure of the state.
As Turkey's geopolitical memory turned toward the Atlantic axis, the Eurasian perspective was largely pushed into the background. Although the transition to multi-party politics was an important step toward democratization, the ideological competition of the Cold War quickly came to dominate domestic politics. Without the creation of a sound institutional foundation, democracy was reduced to the number of votes cast at the ballot box and the absolute domination of whoever captured power. The statist development model weakened. The closure of the village institutes, the failure to complete land reform, and the decline of the planning-oriented conception of the state were early signs of this transformation. After 1960, unplanned urbanization, populism, and identity politics gained strength, while the republic's fundamental objectives, production, industrialization, education, and technology, were pushed into the background. Following the 1979 Iranian Revolution and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, religion-based politics and ethnic separatism moved to the center of the security and political agenda. The neoliberal economic policies implemented after 1980 completed this transformation in the economic sphere. Privatization weakened the state's productive capacity, finance and services moved ahead of industry, agriculture and industry became detached from long-term planning, and the economy grew increasingly dependent on external financing. In this way, the Kemalist paradigm centered on production, science, full independence, and national development, which had formed the foundation of the republic, was significantly eroded. As a result, despite its powerful geopolitics and state tradition, Turkey became a country that often determined its strategic priorities according to the needs of the Atlantic security system rather than its own national interests.
The decline of Kemalism signified not merely an ideological change, but also the weakening of Türkiye's geopolitical independence, state capacity, and strategic autonomy. Conclusion: a new geopolitical era is beginning. The first quarter of the 21st century has become a historic turning point, marking the end of the international order established after the Second World War. The American-centered unipolar system is no longer sustainable. The world is once again moving toward a multipolar geopolitical order in which centers of power compete. Such periods are historic windows of opportunity in which not only great powers, but also regional states with strong geopolitical positions can rewrite their destinies. With its geopolitics at the center of Eurasia, its control over the Turkish Straits, and its position connecting the Mediterranean, Black Sea, Caucasus, Balkans, and Middle East, Türkiye is one of the most critical states in the emerging multipolar order. The principal geopolitical challenge facing Türkiye is therefore the new Israel-centered geopolitics of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Atlantic security architecture integrated with it. This axis seeks to limit Türkiye's blue homeland doctrine, reduce the strategic importance of the TRNC, and control the Eastern Mediterranean's energy and transportation corridors. Yet, as demonstrated in the preceding sections, the relative erosion of U.S. military, economic, and logistical capacity is also increasingly limiting the feasibility of this strategy. For Türkiye, this situation creates not only a power vacuum, but also a historic window of strategic opportunity. History shows that states able to read changing geopolitics accurately during periods of great power transition rise. After the armistice of Mudros, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk did not focus only on the defeat of the state.
He foresaw that the victors of the First World War would not be able to establish an absolute order, that the British Empire had been worn down economically and strategically despite its military victory, and that the imperial system could not continue with its former strength. The national struggle was the product of precisely this geopolitical judgment. Today, the world is undergoing a similar transition of power. As the American-centered unipolar order dissolves, new balances of power are taking shape. What Türkiye needs, as it did a century ago, is an independent state mind capable of reading the changing international system correctly. The actors may change, but the fundamental principles of geopolitics do not. In the Republic's second century, Türkiye's fundamental problem is not to reproduce any ideological debate,
The real issue is to implement a fully independent model of the state capable of rebuilding the production economy, turning science and technology into state policy, developing naval power and the defense industry, achieving self-sufficiency in agriculture, ensuring energy security, and re-establishing the rule of law and merit. Such a transformation is possible only by reinterpreting the Republic's founding state mind in accordance with the conditions of the 21st century. It is precisely for this reason that Kemalism is reappearing on the stage of history. Kemalism is not merely the ideology of the generation that founded the Republic. It is a comprehensive doctrine of the state capable of uniting geopolitics with economics, naval power with industry, secularism with science, statism with production, nationalism with national sovereignty, and revolutionism with continuous renewal. What Turkey needs today is not to repeat the past, but to adapt Kemalism to the geopolitics of the 21st century and once again make it the strategic mind of the state. The Republic's second century will be the century in which Turkey returns to its own geopolitics.
In the changing world order, Kemalism is no longer merely a historical memory for Türkiye. It is a geopolitical imperative, not a strategic preference, but the fundamental condition for sustaining national existence. Kemalism, which founded the Republic, is the immortal founding philosophy of the state that will enable Türkiye to rise again amid the great power competition of the 21st century and carry it to the geopolitical position it deserves.